In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, September 4th, here in South Korea. President Yoon is playing host to New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, who is on a two-day visit to the country to address economic cooperation and productive partnership in ensuring regional peace and stability. 2 Russian ballistic missiles hit a military academy in the Ukrainian city of Poltava, killing at least 51 and injuring well over 200 people in one of the deadliest assaults since the start of Kremlin's invasion in February 2022. Meanwhile, Wall Street loses ground in its first trading session for September, with the Dow retreating well over 1%, the S&P 500 surrendering more than 2%, and the Nasdaq plunging over 3%. We started the Yongsan presidential office this afternoon, where President Yoon Suk-yeol is hosting New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon. For more on their talks, I have our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon live on the line. Do-yeon, do start us off then.
Sonny, as you said, President Yoon and New Zealand's Prime Minister are currently holding a summit. Prime Minister Luxon arrived here at the top office around 11:20 a.m. and proceeded into the summit after a short welcoming ceremony. First, take a listen to what the leaders had to say as they greeted each other and highlighted the depth of the bilateral ties.
뉴질랜드는 6.25 전쟁에서 우리와 함께 싸운 오랜 우방국으로서 뉴질랜드 참전 용사들의 숭고한 희생은 대한민국 발전의 초석이 됐습니다.
It's a country best known to New Zealanders for the energy and the creativity of your K-pop and your TV shows. It's the birthplace of a very famous Korean Kiwi, Lydia Ko, an Olympic champion golfer, someone who's just recently won the British Open, and I think she embodies the very best of both New Zealand and Korea.
Right about now, they should be wrapping up luncheon, which is being held here in the presidential office, part of the Prime Minister's 2-day trip to South Korea. The two leaders last met during the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. back in July when the leaders of the Indo-Pacific Four met. The Prime Minister is set to visit the DMZ tomorrow before leaving South Korea.
Right, and while details, Do-yeon, have yet to be disclosed, for now, though, what would you say are some of the major takeaways from their latest interaction?
The two leaders discussed a wide range of issues pertaining to bilateral cooperation. Those include trade, regional security, and civilian exchanges. Overall, President Yoon highlighted the importance of cooperation between the two like-minded nations amid uncertainties across the world.
러브 군사 협력, 우크라이나 전쟁 등 전체주의, 권위주의 세력의 도전이 지속되는 엄중한 상황에서 한국과 뉴질랜드를 포함한 가치 공유국들 간의 연대는 그 어느 때보다 중요합니다.
In fact, New Zealand showed its support for President Yoon's recent August 15 unification doctrine, which President Yoon unveiled on Liberation Day in August. That makes New Zealand the first country to openly support the doctrine, which mainly states a unification on the basis of liberal democracy. In terms of trade and economic cooperation, the two nations noted that it's been a successful decade since a Korea-New Zealand FTA came into effect. The leaders emphasized building on from this, as trade volume between the two countries doubled in the last 10 years. The top office also said the two nations will begin talks to upgrade the current, quote, 21st century partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. That's all for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, and thank you for the coverage, and do keep us posted throughout the day. Moving on to the international front, Ukraine is accusing Russia of, quote, a barbaric assault on a military academy, leading to hundreds of casualties. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
In one of the deadliest single attacks since the start of the Ukraine war nearly 2.5 years ago, Russian airstrikes on a Ukrainian military educational facility on Tuesday killed at least 51 people and injured 219 others. According to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, 2 ballistic missiles struck the facility located in the city of Poltava, as well as a nearby hospital. The head of the city's military administration said that at least 10 residential buildings were damaged at the military educational facility. The Associated Press said that the facility had been training communications and electronics officers, as well as drone pilots. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry said the missiles struck as people were evacuating after air raid sirens started blaring and called the attack barbaric. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin concluded his state visit to Mongolia, an International Criminal Court member nation. The visit by the Russian leader, who had an arrest warrant issued by the ICC for his war crimes in Ukraine, is raising the issue of the court's limitations. The visit took place despite Mongolia being obligated to arrest Putin upon his arrival. Pundits say that Mongolia was highly unlikely to execute the arrest warrant on Putin, given the fact that the country has a high dependence on Russian oil. 95% of its oil imports come from Russia. Over in Kyiv, 4 cabinet members have resigned from their posts ahead of a reshuffle. 4 ministers resigned on Tuesday, including Deputy Prime Minister for European Affairs Olga Stefanishina and Minister of Strategic Industries Alexander Kamayshin, who had a significant role in boosting arms production for Ukraine. Other resignations include the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Environment. President Zelensky said last week that a cabinet reshuffle was taking place soon, while the head of his party in the parliament said Tuesday that half of the current ministers were likely to be replaced. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, much to the anger and anguish of family, friends and the broader international community, the Palestinian militant group Hamas has begun sharing footage of the 6 Israeli hostages before their tragic shootings. Our foreign affairs correspondent Peunji reports.
Hamas released a video of one of the 6 slain captives whose bodies were recovered by the Israeli military from Gaza over the weekend. In a 2-minute-long edited video released on the Telegram channel of Hamas military wing, 25-year-old Uri Danino asked the Israeli people to not neglect those being held by Hamas. This comes a day after the militant group on Monday night first released a video of one of the murdered hostages, 24-year-old Aide, who had been working as a bartender at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th, on the day she was kidnapped by Hamas. The bodies of 6 slain captives were recovered from a tunnel in Gaza by Israeli military on Saturday local time. The Israeli government conducted a forensic examination and said the hostages appeared to have been shot at close range sometime between Thursday and Friday morning. In response to the video showing Israeli hostages, the White House press secretary said Hamas will pay for their crimes and that U.S. President Joe Biden will work around the clock with his team to get a ceasefire deal done.
Make no mistake about it, Hamas leaders are going to pay for these crimes. And he and his team, for sure, will keep working around the clock to get this hostage deal done. And this is a president that has been pretty clear about that.
The U.S. Department of Justice also charged several senior Hamas leaders over the terrorist attack on October 7th, making it the first step by the Justice Department to hold people accountable for the attack in Israel. The defendants, including Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist organization's leader in Gaza, are facing 7 charges, such as terrorism charges, conspiracy to murder U.S. nationals, and conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction resulting in death. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Israeli protesters poured into the streets in Tel Aviv for a 3rd night on Sunday, in grief and anger. They demanded Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas to bring the remaining hostages home and end the nearly 11 months of war. Peunji, Arirang News.
In the U.S., former President Donald Trump has published a book of photographs titled Save America that shares key moments of his political career. The $100 book includes several pictures taken with North Korea's Kim Jong-un over a spread of 10 pages depicting his meeting with Kim, highlighted with captions in his own words that claim the interaction, quote, proves real change is indeed possible as the talks were, quote, honest, direct and productive. The book also includes pictures of Mr. Trump with former President Moon Jae-in. Stocks on Wall Street tumbled on their first day of trade for September amid renewed concerns over the U.S. economy. Our aide covers the closing numbers and more.
New York stocks plummeted on Tuesday due to disappointing U.S. economic data, and the uncertainty about the Federal Reserve's future interest rate decisions also contributed to the declines. All three major indexes experienced their biggest daily percentage drops since August 5th due to fears of economic recession in the U.S. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down around 1.5%, and the S&P 500 shed more than 2%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq dropped by more than 3%. U.S. markets were closed on Monday for Labor Day, and Tuesday's trading marked the start of a new month. Tech giant Nvidia saw shares drop over 9% to close at $108, the largest single-day market value loss for a U.S. company at around $280 billion. The AI chipmaker was the weakest performer among the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks, reaching its lowest point since August 12th. In early August, stocks fell sharply due to concerns about a U.S. recession. The S&P 500 fell more than 7% before recovering, and all three major stock indexes ended August with gains. The U.S. government will release its August jobs report on Friday, marking the first major economic update of the month. Additionally, Wall Street may face seasonal challenges as September has historically been one of the weakest months for markets. Yoon, Arirang News.
The floor leader of the opposition Democratic Party, Park Chan-dae, has proposed a consultative body to tackle disruptions in healthcare services amid the prolonged medical boycott. During a parliamentary address today, Park asserted that dialogue among the government, political parties and medical community is the only solution. Meanwhile, with regard to slowing consumption, he called for relief vouchers to reinvigorate spending. He also pledged to push for laws to fight deep-fake sex crimes. And on the healthcare front, the government has linked staff shortage at emergency care units to the prolonged collective action by doctors in training. What's more, students at medical schools also continue to collectively boycott classrooms. Our Kim Jong-un reports.
South Korea is experiencing a lack of medical personnel in emergency care, which the government says is mainly due to the mass resignation of residents in February. During a daily briefing on the medical emergency response on Tuesday, the Health Ministry announced there had been around 590 residents before the February protest, but by mid-August, the number dropped to below 60.
The decrease in the total number of doctors in emergency rooms is due to the mass walkout of residents in February, and it's not a recent change in circumstances, but rather a situation that has continued since the emergency medical system was put into place.
The total number of doctors working in emergency rooms is currently a little over 74% of the average. Despite the fall in the number of residents, however, the number of emergency medicine specialists increased by 66 compared to before February. And to fill the shortage of trainee doctors, the government has decided to deploy military doctors in emergency units starting Wednesday. Meanwhile, medical school students are not returning to class even as schools across the country begin the second semester. The number of medical students who have completed registration at 9 national universities outside the capital area only amounted to around 4% of the total number of medical students. Jeju National University did not see even a single student register. Medical school students have been refusing to return to school in protest of the government's push to increase the medical school admissions quota. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
In other news, amid the brewing tensions on the Korean peninsula, pundits here and elsewhere gathered at a forum in Seoul to address current prospects of unification. Our Kim Jong-sil has more.
The Global Korea Forum kicked off with this year's theme, Unified Korean Peninsula for Freedom, Peace and Prosperity. As in the past year, North Korea's leader has denied the idea of reunification. Now is a critical time to discuss this issue.
The reunification of the Korean peninsula should be achieved in a manner that respects and shares universal values such as freedom and human rights. However, this does not imply forced absorption through power, as clearly emphasized.
Reunification through being absorbed by South Korea is something that Pyongyang fears the most, as it would bring an end to the Kim regime. It's not what the South Korean government is aiming for either, and the ministry explained why it's important to make efforts to bring global attention to this issue.
Reunification is not just a matter between the South and North Korea. It's an affair that requires the solidarity and support of the international community. It's therefore crucial for the South Korean government to take the initiative and make efforts to gain such support.
Many of the panelists also discussed the changing international landscape as factors that may affect the security of the Korean peninsula. The deepening rivalry between the US and China, the growing Russian presence in the north amid the war in Ukraine, and finding a global consensus on the Korean peninsula issue were raised as some of the main challenges.
I think it's going to be very difficult to make practical progress in terms of unification given the current circumstances. The South Korean government could focus on trying to create a better relationship with North Korea. Even that may be impossible at the moment. Well, the Netherlands and South Korea are very strong partners, so they fully support the South Korean government in this.
The Minister of Unification plans to hold a U.S. conference of the Global Korea Forum in Washington this November. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Researchers believe a substantial reserve of lithium may be buried in 2 counties here in the country. Our Uljin has details.
The core element of secondary batteries that electric vehicles run on is lithium. The crucial mineral is dubbed white gold. But South Korea still imports all of the country's lithium needs. But now, after examining 12 likely sites across the country, the Korea Institute of Geoscience and Mineral Resources may have found 2 mineral deposit locations that could have large amounts of lithium. Uljin County in Gyeongsang-buk-do Province and Danyang County in Chungcheongbuk-do Province.
이 지역에서 얼마나 좀 리튬이 많이 보존되어 있는가를 그 양을 확인을 해야 되기 때문에 저희가 지금 이제 한 50m 간격으로 시루를 지금 쭉 채취를 해야 됩니다.
The mineral deposit discovered in Uljin County is nearly 60 meters wide, and its location is near the Boam mine, a major mining site in the 1940s and 50s. But the problem is that these reserves cannot be drilled to confirm lithium content due to environmental protection codes.
This area is the protected Kumgangsong Pine Grove. We've had discussions with the Korea Forest Service, but the final answer is no drilling.
The possible deposit site in Danyang County is on land owned by small domestic companies. Samples have shown that the quality may be lower than what would be extracted in Uljin County, but drilling may be possible if an agreement can be reached with the landowners.
There is a company that Bill Gates has invested in. It has data scientists and geologists. Now we're hoping to conduct an exploratory drilling in collaboration with that company.
The institute said in addition to the 12 locations explored this time, their artificial intelligence has selected another 35 possible mining locations, which it hopes to visit and examine this year to determine the potential amount of lithium content. Yoon, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. A former Deputy Chief of Staff to New York Governor Kathy Hochul has been charged with acting as an undisclosed agent of the Chinese government. 41-year-old Linda Sun and her husband and co-defendant Chris Hu were arrested at their Long Island residence on Tuesday morning, pleading not guilty to all charges in federal court. Sun, who has worked for the New York state government for over a decade, including as an aide to former Governor Andrew Cuomo, was charged with violating and conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registrations Act, visa fraud, alien smuggling, and money laundering conspiracy, while her husband, Hu, mainly faced charges of money laundering, bank fraud, and misuse of identification. According to a federal indictment, Sun, quote, acted at the order, direction, or request of Beijing in return for millions of dollars in kickbacks for personal gain. Sun was sacked almost 2 years ago after the office of Governor Hochul discovered evidence of misconduct and reported it to the authorities. A boat carrying dozens of migrants capsized off the French coast in the English Channel on Tuesday while attempting to cross the channel from France to Britain. French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said that a pregnant woman and several children were among the 12 confirmed dead so far. The French Coast Guard reported that over 50 people have been rescued off Cape Grisnez near Boulogne-sur-Mer and that 2 remain in critical condition. Local officials said that the victims are believed to be primarily of Eritrean origin, but that they could not yet specify the exact nationalities. According to the UN's International Organization for Migration, before Tuesday, 30 people had already died crossing the channel this year, coming close to the record 45 deaths of migrants in 2021. French Interior Minister Darmanin said that the French authorities were preventing 60% of small boat departures, but urged the UK and EU to agree on a treaty on migration to deal with the issue. UK Home Secretary Yvette Cooper described the incident as horrifying and deeply tragic. In France, a 71-year-old man is on trial over allegations of drugging his wife and inviting dozens of strangers to rape her in their home over a period of nearly a decade. In a case that has shocked the country, prosecutors said the husband, named Dominique Pellicot, offered sex with his wife on a website and filmed the abuse after drugging her unconscious. 50 other men who allegedly took part have also been accused of rape, all facing up to 20 years in jail if found guilty. Pellicot's wife, who is now 72 years old, had apparently been entirely unaware of the alleged rapes that took place at their home in the southern French town of Mazan due to the drugs until police told her about them 4 years ago. The trial, which opened on Monday, is set to last until December. New Zealand's government announced Tuesday that it will almost triple entry fees for tourists to 100 New Zealand dollars, or around $62 US. According to the National Party-led coalition government, the so-called International Visitor Conservation and Tourism Levy will come into effect from October 1st. While the country's domestic tourism industry has criticised the higher tax for making New Zealand incredibly expensive to visit, New Zealand's Minister for Tourism and Hospitality said the increase would contribute to high-value conservation areas and projects and improve visitor experiences on public conservation land. A 35 New Zealand dollar tourism levy was introduced in July 2019, but the government says it didn't cover costs associated with a large number of visitors. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Many of us in Korea are enjoying the transition from summer to fall despite sweltering afternoon heat. Mornings and evenings are becoming cooler and crisp with fewer daylight hours each day. We had comfortable mornings, but afternoon scorchers are in the forecast across much of Korea. Bright sunshine will shine down during the day, boosting UV rays to a very high level in most parts today. So don't forget to apply a good amount of sunblock before heading outside. Wearing sunscreen is just as important in the autumn as it is in the summer. Meanwhile, Jeju woke up to another tropical night this morning, and certain parts of the island are forecast to see afternoon rain. Highs should hover around the low 30s, going up 32 degrees in Seoul, Gwangju, and Daegu this afternoon. On and off showers are in the forecast for the latter half of the week, but afternoon heat looks to stay through the beginning of Chuseok holiday next weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, those are the top stories at this hour here in Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon Korea's martial art, Taekwondo. Do stay with us.